The starship Chrysalis was a silent scar against the endless dark. Inside its cold metal halls, the air hummed with the low, tired sound of machines trying not to die. It was a sound Jin knew as well as his own breathing. He floated near a control panel, his fingers tracing a line of cracked glass over a dead screen. His sister Myra was strapped into a harness nearby, her eyes closed, but he knew she wasn't sleeping. Nobody slept well anymore. They were the last of the Kimura ship's people. Once, their grandparents' had sailed from Earth, full of hope, to join the great galactic Concord. They had found the stars already full of life, ancient and strange. For a little while, there was wonder. Then came the diagnosis. A slow unraveling in their cells, passed down through the generations. The Concord doctors called it genetic deterioration syndrome. It wasn't fatal, not quickly. It just made them less. A little weaker, a little slower to heal, their lifespans shortening with each new generation. To the star-faring races of the Concord, the elegant Veil, the crystalline Cathar, the others, it was a stain. A weakness that could spread. They were declared a quarantine risk. And so, they were cast out. The memory of the Veil magistrate's cold, translated voice still echoed in the quiet. You are a danger to the harmony of the whole. You are granted exile on the world of Xylos, where you may live out your days in peace, isolated. This is mercy. Xylos was a gray rock on a star chart. A prison painted as a gift. Jin pushed off gently from the panel, drifting over to a viewport. The stars outside were not friends. They were the eyes of those who had rejected them. He was a practical man, an engineer. He fixed things, but he couldn't fix this. He could only keep the Chrysalis's engines coughing along, the air scrubbers wheezing, the lights flickering. He felt the weight of every soul left on the ship, all 83 of them, on his shoulders. Mira carried the weight of their bodies, trying to slow the decay with her limited medical knowledge. They were both failing. We're approaching the last jump point, a voice said softly. It was Sue, one of the elders, her face lined with more than just age. The coordinates for Xylos are locked in. We will be in cryosleep for the final journey. Jin just nodded. The final journey. To a silent, lonely end, forgotten by the galaxy. The idea was a physical pain in his chest. He looked at Mira, saw the dark circles under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands that was a new symptom. They deserved more than a slow fade on a dead world. That night, during his watch, a different kind of pain made him work. It was a stubborn, angry pain. He was prying open an old access panel to reroute a failing power line when his tool slipped. The old, brittle casing of a data spool cracked. Instead of sparks, a soft, blue light glowed from within. Frowning, Jin carefully extracted the broken spool. It was ancient, pre-exile tech. On a whim, he patched it into a working reader in his small workshop. Static fizzed, then a voice emerged, tinny and warm, cutting through the sterile silence of the ship. And to any who might hear this, from anywhere in the great dark, we send greetings. This is Earth. We are here. Our doors are open. You are not alone. Jin froze. The voice was speaking in Old Korean, a version of the language that had softened and changed on the Chrysalis over the generations. It was like hearing a song from a childhood he'd never had. The message repeated, simple and clear, followed by coordinates. Sol system. Third planet. Earth. The word was a myth. A faded picture in a history lesson. The place their ancestors had left, believing the Concord was the future. The place that had, by all accounts, been struggling with its own problems when the Kimura ship departed. They had never looked back. The Concord was everything, but the Concord had thrown them away. His heart began to beat a hard, frantic rhythm against his ribs. He checked the spool's metadata. The transmission was over 100 years old. Was Earth even there anymore? Were they still human? The Concord species looked nothing like each other. What if Earth had changed beyond recognition? Then he thought of Xylos, gray, silent, the end. He thought of Myra's trembling hands. With a resolve that felt both terrifying and calm, Jin began to work. His engineer's mind, trained to solve problems, took over. The navigation console was locked, programmed only for the one sad course. But locks were made by beings who assumed others would obey. Jin did not want to obey anymore. Using the old spool's data, he cross-fed coordinates, creating a phantom error in the system. He wrote a patch so small and quiet it would look like a natural system flare. It took him 6 hours. His own hands shook, not from sickness, but from fear. As he input the final sequence, the star chart on his main screen flickered. The single glaring line toward Xylos wavered, broke, and reformed. Now it reached out. Across an immense gulf of space he knew the chrysalis was barely capable of crossing, toward a yellow star labeled Soul. The door to his workshop hissed open. Myra floated there, her hair a dark cloud around her worried face. Jin? The bridge sensors are showing a course irregularity. Sue is panicking. What's happening? He turned to her, the blue glow of the star chart reflecting in his eyes. We're not going to Xylos. What? Jin, the Concord exiled us, he said, his voice low but firm. They defined us by what we lack. This. He pointed to the speaker where the old message, now on a loop, whispered its gentle greeting. This does not. Mira listened to the repeating message. Earth? It's just an old broadcast. They could be gone. Or worse. I know, Jin admitted. It is a terrible risk. We might die in the void trying to get there. But on Xylos, we will only die slower. And we will die as exiles. He looked at his sister. I would rather die trying to go home than live accepting that we have none. Mira stared at the coordinates, at the line on the screen, pointing toward a forgotten origin. She saw the stubborn set of Jin's jaw, the same one their father had. She thought of their people, sleeping in their pods, dreaming of gray rocks. She thought of the word weakness. The others will be afraid, she said finally. I am afraid, Jin replied. But I am more afraid of giving up. Mira was quiet for a long time. Then she pushed over to the console and called up the medical supply logs. The cryo-sleep drugs will last longer if I reduce the dosage by 10%. It will be less restful, but it will give us more time for the journey. She looked at him. If we are doing this, we need every day we can steal. A faint, impossible warmth spread in Jin's chest. He wasn't alone. Together, they input the final commands. The chrysalis's engines, with a groan of metal that echoed through the hull, began their slow, powerful burn, turning the great ship away from the exile promised by the stars, and toward the distant, welcoming whisper of home. Outside the viewport, the cold, judging stars watched them go. The silence of the chrysalis was different now. Before, it had been the silence of despair, a slow drift toward an inevitable end. Now, it was the tense, humming silence of a held breath. The ship was committed. Jin's course correction was a stone thrown across a pond. They could only follow the ripples and hope they reached the other side. Most of the ship's passengers remained in cryosleep, their dreams unknowing. Only the small crew rotation, led by Jin and Mira, and a few elders like Sue, were awake to witness the journey. Sue had been furious when she learned what Jin had done. Her face, already marked by deep lines, seemed to sink further into shadow. You have doomed us, boy, she had said, her voice a dry rustle in the mess hall. "The Concord gave us a place. A hard place, but a place. Now, we are lawbreakers, runaways, if the void does not claim us. The Concord hunters will. The Concord gave us a grave," Jin had replied, not with anger, but with a tired certainty that surprised even him. "I am just choosing to walk away from it." There was no more debate. The energy for arguing was a luxury they could not afford. Every system was strained. The engines, old and weary, were pushed to a sustainable maximum. Mira spent her days monitoring life support, watching the carbon dioxide scrubbers work harder, listening for any hitch in the rhythmic exchange of air. Her own symptoms, the slight tremor in her fingers, a persistent fatigue, were a constant reminder of the clock ticking inside them all. Jin's world shrank to the cockpit and the engine room. He knew every groan of the ship's frame, every flicker on the power grid. He spoke to the chrysalis in his mind, urging it on, patching leaks with sealant and hope. The vast distance to Seoul was a number on a screen, a number so large it felt meaningless. They were a speck moving through an infinite ocean dot to fight the emptiness. Jin and Myra would sometimes float by the largest viewport, staring at the unchanging starfield. One day, Myra pointed at a small, bright dot that was slowly growing sharper. "That's the Sol system's outer marker," she said softly. "A dwarf planet called Pluto. Our old charts have it." The sight of it, a real place from their ancestral stories, sent a jolt through Jin. It was no longer just coordinates. It was a destination. He felt a strange, fragile connection across the centuries dot. It was then that the long-range scanner chimed a soft, urgent sound they had not heard in years. Myra floated to the console, her eyes scanning the data. Her blood went cold. Jin. He was at her side in an instant. On the screen, 2 new signatures had appeared on an intercept vector. They were small, fast, and definitely not natural. They were coming from the direction of the Concord fringe outposts. "Scout ships," Jin whispered, his mouth dry. "They found us." Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in his throat. The chrysalis was a drifting habitat, not a warship. It had no weapons, no real shields. Its only defense was its insignificance, and that was now gone. Su was summoned. She looked at the scanner display, and her anger seemed to drain away, leaving only a profound sadness. "So it ends here," she said. "In the dark, between nowhere and nowhere." "No," Jin said, the word coming out harder than he intended. He began working at the comms panel, a desperate plan forming. "They'll hail us. Order us to stop, to turn back. We don't answer. And then they will shoot us down," Sue said. "Maybe," Jin said. "Or maybe they will try to board. But look." He pulled up a system map. "We are closer to Seoul than to any Concord outpost now. If we can buy time, if we can reach the inner system." "What is in the inner system?" Sue asked, her voice hollow. "More ghosts? Another old recording?" "A chance," Myra said, suddenly. She was looking at the medical scanner, linked to her own biosigns. "A chance to be seen as people, not just a syndrome." Jin is right. We run. It is all we have left. They powered down every non-essential system, making the chrysalis a colder, darker, quieter ghost on the scanners. They waited. The 2 scout ships closed in, their signals pinging the hull with active scans. A hailing frequency lit up, flashing with the official Concord emblem. The 3 of them watched it blink in the dim light. The automated translator would be sending a standard order: heave to. Prepare for inspection and seizure. Jin's finger hovered over the control. With a final decisive motion, he shut off the external comms receiver entirely. The blinking light died. For a long, terrible minute, nothing happened. Then, one of the scout ships fired a warning shot, a bright lance of energy that passed so close to the bow it lit up the viewport. "They want us intact," Myra breathed. "They want to take us back as an example." "Full power to engines," Jin ordered, his voice cracking. "Emergency thrust, now." The chrysalis shuddered violently as the ancient engines were forced into an overload. Alarms blared. A conduit in the engineering bay burst, spraying vapor. Jin ignored it, his eyes fixed on the nav screen. The scout ships were turning, accelerating to match. They were far more agile. Another shot, this one closer. The ship rocked. "They're aiming for the engines." Sue cried. Jin was flying on instinct now. He threw the ship into a slow, lumbering roll, a pathetic attempt at evasion. A third shot grazed the lower hull. A damage report flashed a minor compartment breach. Automatically sealed. They were not going to outrun them. The scouts were in weapons range again, lining up for a crippling shot. Jin felt a crushing weight. He had led his people to die in a pointless chase. Just then, the system-wide comms scanner, which Jin had left scanning on a broad frequency, crackled to life. A new voice filled the cockpit. It was clear, strong, and undeniably human, speaking a fluid, modern Korean. "Unidentified vessels. This is Terran Alliance, patrol ship Gyeongbok. You are entering the protected space of the Sol system. Cease all aggressive maneuvers. State your identity and purpose." Jin, Mira, and Sue stared at the speaker, frozen. On the scanner, 2 new signatures, larger and with powerful energy readings, emerged from behind the gravitational shadow of Neptune. They moved with smooth, confident speed, placing themselves between the chrysalis and the Concorde scouts. The Concorde ships stopped their pursuit. They hung in space, uncertain. A tense silence stretched across the void. The voice from the Gyeongbok came again, this time on a frequency the Concorde ships would also hear. "Concorde vessels, you are in violation of the Terran isolation boundary. You have no jurisdiction here. Withdraw immediately." One of the Concorde scouts fired a final, frustrated burst of scan pulses at the chrysalis, collecting as much data as it could. Then, slowly, both ships turned and began to accelerate back toward the dark from which they came. In the sudden quiet, the only sound was the ragged breathing of the 3 people in the chrysalis cockpit. The Terran ship hailed them again, the voice now softer, but no less firm. "Drifting vessel, you are safe now. Please respond. Can you hear us?" Jin fumbled for the comms control, his hands trembling not from sickness, but from a surge of emotion so powerful it stole his breath. He opened the channel. He tried to speak, but his throat was tight. He looked at Myra, who nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. He looked at Sue, whose expression was one of stunned disbelief. He took a deep, shaky breath and leaned toward the microphone. "We hear you," he said, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. We are the Kimura exiles. We are coming home." The chrysalis hung against the velvet dark of space, a silent, battered egg. Beside it, the Terran Alliance ship Gyeongbok looked sleek and alive, its hull gleaming under the distant sun. A flexible docking tube, like a helping hand, had extended and sealed itself to the exile ship's main airlock. Inside the chrysalis, the atmosphere was thick with fear. The handful of awake crew members, including Jin and Mira, floated in the main access corridor. They wore clean clothes, the best they had, but the fabric was worn thin. Their faces were pale from long years under artificial light. They waited. No one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the Terran, ship systems now feeding power to their own. Jin's heart was a drum in his chest. This was his doing. The hope, the terror, it all came back to him. He glanced at Myra. She gave him a small, tight smile, but her knuckles were white where she gripped a handhold. With a soft hiss and a series of solid clunks, the airlock cycle finished. The inner door slid open. Two figures floated through. The first was a woman. She wore a simple, dark blue uniform without heavy armor. Her hair was cut short. Her face was calm and kind, with eyes that held a deep intelligence. She moved with an easy grace in the zero gravity. The man behind her was younger, with an open, curious face. His uniform was similar, but had a pilot's insignia. The woman looked at the small group of exiles. Her gaze took in their thinness, their weary eyes, the worn-out state of the corridor behind them. There was no shock on her face, only a quiet, assessing compassion. "Welcome," she said, her voice the same one from the comms. "My name is Hannah. I am a councilwoman for the Terran Alliance. This is Tay, one of our best pilots." Tay nodded, his eyes flickering with concern as he looked them over. There was a long silence. Jin realized they were waiting for him. He was the one who had answered the hail. He was, by default, their voice. "I am Jin," he said, forcing his voice to be steady. "This is my sister Myra, our elder Sue." He gestured weakly. "Thank you for intervening." "It was our duty," Hannah said simply. "You are in Terran space now. You are under our protection." She looked past him into the dim ship. "How many are aboard?" 83, Myra answered softly. "Most are in cryosleep. They are not well." "We brought medical supplies," Tay said, speaking for the first time. His voice was warmer than Hannah's, full of a youthful earnestness. "And food. Real food. From Earth." He gestured back to the docking tube, where several large containers were tethered. The word Earth hung in the air. It seemed to glow. Hannah looked at Jin. "May we come aboard properly?" "We would like to help. We mean you no harm." Jin exchanged a look with Sue. The old woman, who had expected judgment or violence, seemed disarmed by the plain, quiet respect in Hannah's manner. Sue gave a slow, hesitant nod. What followed was not an invasion, but a careful, gentle infusion. Terran medics in soft-soled shoes and simple uniforms moved through the chrysalis with portable scanners. They spoke in low, respectful tones. They did not touch anyone without asking. They scanned the cryopods, their faces serious but not disgusted, as they read the genetic decay data. Mira provided. Tay, meanwhile, worked with Jin and a few others to bring in the supplies. The containers held packages of food, not pastes or nutrient bars, but real, complex food. There were fruits, vegetables, vacuum-sealed meals that smelled of herbs and spices when warmed. The exiles stared at them as if they were artifacts from a dream. In the ship's small mess hall. Now brighter with light from the Terran ship's power, Hannah sat with Jin, Mira, and Sue. She listened as they told their story in broken pieces. The hopeful departure from Earth centuries ago. The first contact with the Concord. The gradual diagnosis. The shame. The exile. Hannah listened without interrupting. When they finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The Concord values perfection above all else," she said finally. "A single flaw, to them, is a threat to the whole. We learned a different lesson here." She told them of Earth's own dark age. The climate collapses, the wars over shrinking resources. "We were tearing ourselves apart," she said. "We were defining each other by our flaws, by our differences. It nearly ended us." She paused. "We survived by choosing a different path. We decided that strength is not about being flawless. It is about being adaptable. It is about community. About helping the person next to you, because their weakness today might be your weakness tomorrow. We call it the principle of the second chance. It is the foundation of everything we have rebuilt." Jin felt her words sink into him, soothing a hurt he had carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there. They were not being pitied. They were being understood. Myra, ever practical, pushed a data slate across the table. It showed the complex helix of their genetic code, with ugly red markers highlighting the decay points. Can your people do anything about this? Her voice was barely a whisper, terrified of the answer. Hannah took the slate. She studied it, her brow furrowed. She then handed it to a Terran doctor who had been waiting quietly by the door. The doctor looked at it, zooming in on the data. He nodded slowly, not with triumph, but with thoughtful consideration. It's advanced degradation, the doctor said. But the pattern is stable. It's not a raging virus. It's a slow erosion. Our gene therapy has dealt with similar, if less severe, legacy conditions from our own past. He looked at Mira, then at Hannah. It will take time. And resources. But yes, Councilwoman, we can help. We can halt it, and in time, perhaps even reverse some of the damage. Mira put a hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking with a silent sob. Jin reached over and gripped her arm, his own eyes burning. In that moment, a new alarm blared. But it was not from the chrysalis. It came from the gongbok, sharp and urgent on Hannah's wrist comb. Tay's voice came through, tense. Councilwoman Hannah, long-range scan. A Concorde cruiser. It just warped in at the edge of the system. It's big, and it's heading this way, fast. The warmth that had begun to fill the room vanished, sucked away into the cold of space. The color drained from Sue's face. Jin's stomach turned to ice. They had been found again, but this time by something that could not be scared off by a patrol ship. Hannah stood up. Her calmness did not disappear, but it hardened into something steely. She looked at the terrified exiles, then at her own people. Tay, recall all non-essential personnel from the chrysalis. Seal the docking tube, but maintain the hard lock. Do not, under any circumstances, detach. She turned to Jin. Your people should prepare for possible acceleration. This may get rough. What are you going to do? Jin asked, his voice tight. Hannah's jaw was set. I am going to talk to them. And then, she said, looking toward the direction of Earth, a fierce pride in her eyes, I am going to tell them no. The peace was shattered. The warm, hopeful air inside the chrysalis was gone, replaced by a familiar, cold dread. Jin watched as the Terran medics and helpers moved quickly, but without panic, gathering their portable equipment and gliding back toward the docking tube. Their faces were serious, focused. Not afraid, Jin noticed. Determined. Hannah remained with them for a moment longer. Go to your command center, she said to Jin, her voice low and steady. You will be able to hear the communication. You have a right to know what is said. Then she turned and followed her people back to the gongbok. Jin, Mira, and Sue floated quickly to the dim cockpit. The main screen, now fed with clearer data from the Terran ship, showed a terrifying sight. The Concorde cruiser was a jagged, angular shape, like a piece of broken, dark glass. It was many times larger than the gongbok, and it pulsed with a malevolent energy signature. It was moving toward them with a silent, terrible purpose. On the audio channel, a new voice filled the space. It was flat, mechanical, translated by a cold computer. It was the voice of the Concorde. Terran vessel gongbok. This is the Concorde Lawship Judgment's Claw. You are harboring biological contraband, subjects of a medical quarantine order. Surrender the exile ship Chrysalis and its occupants immediately. Failure to comply is a violation of Galactic Health Code 7 and will result in enforcement. The words were like icy water. Biological contraband, subjects, they were not people. They were a problem to be cleaned up. A moment of silence followed. Then Hannah's voice came through, clear and calm. She did not sound like she was speaking to a massive warship. She sounded like a teacher correcting a mistaken student. Concord Vessel Judgment's Claw. This is Councilwoman Hannah of the Terran Alliance. You are in sovereign Terran space. The individuals aboard the Chrysalis are human beings. They are under our protection. Your quarantine order has no authority here. You are ordered to leave this system immediately. Jin held his breath. On the screen, he saw the cruiser's forward arrays glow a dull, threatening red. It was powering weapons. The mechanical voice returned, harsher no. Your isolationist policies do not override galactic law. The genetic decay they carry is a threat to all sapient life. This is your final warning. Detach and withdraw, or be considered accomplices to their crime. In the cockpit of the Djongbok, Hannah stood straight. She looked at Tay, who gave her a firm nod from the pilot's seat. She looked at the faces of her crew, all watching her. Then she opened a new, wider channel. This one would broadcast not just to the Concord ship, but back to Earth, to Mars, to every Terran listening post. Her voice changed. It was no longer just diplomatic. It was a declaration. People of Earth, you hear this threat. You hear how they speak of our kin. She paused, letting her words hang. Centuries ago, our ancestors sent a ship out to the stars, seeking community. They found judgment. They found a galaxy that defines strength as purity and sees any weakness as a sin to be cut away. She looked at the visual feed of the Chrysalis, a battered, brave ship holding its place. These children of that ship were cast out by the stars. They were told they were flawed. They were told they were dangerous. They were told they had no place. Her voice grew stronger, ringing with a conviction that made Jin's spine tingle. We on Earth learned a different lesson from our own suffering. We learned that true strength is not in never being broken. It is in how we help each other heal. It is in compassion. It is in the promise that no one is left behind. She took a deep breath, her eyes blazing. So here is our answer to your judgment's claw. You measure strength in perfection. We find it in compassion. These people are not contraband. They are not subjects. They are ours. And we do not abandon our own. The channel closed. For 3 heartbeats, it was only the hum of the ships and the pounding of blood in Jin's ears. Then, space around them began to move. From behind the orbit of Mars, from lunar docking yards, from hidden positions near Jupiter's moons, ships began to warp in. Not 1 or 2, dozens. They were Terran designs, sleek, fast, and built not for conquest, but for defense. They did not form an aggressive spearhead. Instead, they moved with perfect coordination, placing themselves in a wide, layered cordon between the Chrysalis and the Concord cruiser. They were a wall, a shield. The Concord cruiser slowed, its weapon glow flickering uncertainly. It was powerful, but it was alone. The Terran fleet did not point their weapons at it. They simply pointed them outward, a silent, united show of force that said, "Come no further." On the Chrysalis screen, a private channel opened. It was Tay. His face was lit by cockpit lights, a fierce grin on his face. "Jin, you see that? That's the Welcome Home Committee. Now, listen. We can't stay here playing a staring game. That cruiser might get stupid. We need to get you to a safe port. Now. Where?" Jin asked, his voice hoarse. "Mars," Tay said. "There's a research biodome complex at Hellas Planitia. It's got the best medical facilities outside of Earth, and it's fortified. It's your new address, if you're ready." Jin looked at Mira, at Sue. Sue's eyes were wide, filled with tears she would not shed. She nodded once, firmly. Myra squeezed Jin's hand. "Yes," Jin said to Tay. "Get us there." "All right then," Tay said, his hands flying over his controls. "The Djongbok is going to stay hard docked to you. We'll be your tugboat and your shield. The fleet will cover our retreat. Hold on to something. This might be a brisk ride." The chrysalis groaned as the Terran ship's powerful engines engaged, nudging them onto a new course. The great ship began to move, not under its own sickly power, but carried by the strength of its newfound home. Jin watched the viewport as the beautiful, terrifying wall of Terran ships held its position, a defiant barrier against the cold, dark judgment of the stars. The Concorde cruiser did not fire. It hung there, a silent, angry monument to a philosophy that had just been decisively rejected. As the chrysalis, escorted by the Gyeongbok, moved steadily inward toward the warm red glow of Mars, Jin realized something. He was not afraid of the cruiser behind him anymore. He was looking ahead, toward the world that was waiting for them. A world that had just declared, for all the galaxy to hear, that his people belonged. The landing was not a gentle settling. It was a firm, decisive embrace. The chrysalis, still locked to the Gyeongbok, was guided into a vast docking cradle within the Martian biodome complex. The cradling arms closed around the old ship with a series of heavy, final clangs that echoed through its hull. For the first time in generations, the ship was not moving. It was still. Inside, the silence was profound. The constant, subtle vibration of the engines was gone. The ever-present fear of the next system failure had faded. Jin stood in the cockpit, his hand resting on the cold console. He could feel a new kind of hum through the floor, the sound of a living world's infrastructure, of powerful generators, of circulating air and water. The main airlock cycled open, not to the hard vacuum of space or the sterile tunnel of another ship, but to a wide, softly lit passageway. Warm, humid air, smelling of soil and growing things, washed over them. It was a smell none of them had ever known. It was overwhelming. Hana and Tay were there, waiting. Behind them stood a small group of people in simple, clean-clothed scientists, doctors, and community coordinators. Their faces held curiosity, professionalism, and a clear, simple kindness. There were no weapons, no barriers. "Jin, Myra," Hana said, her smile reaching her eyes. "Welcome to Hellas Planitia. Welcome to Mars." One by one, the exiles of the chrysalis were helped from their ship. Some walked shakily, unused to consistent gravity. Others, like Sue, were brought out on medical floaters. Their pale skin and wide, apprehensive eyes made them look like ghosts emerging into the light. They stared at the passageway walls, which were not metal, but a creamy, manufactured stone. They stared at the green vines that grew in planters along the ceiling, filtering the air. They stared at the faces of the Terrans, who looked so much like them, yet so different, healthy, vibrant, sure. The Martians did not crowd them. They gave them space, speaking in soft voices, offering blankets, cups of warm, sweet tea. A young doctor named Min approached Mira with a data pad. "We've analyzed the preliminary scans from the Gyeongbok," she said. "Your work slowing the degradation was incredible. We're ready to begin the first stabilization treatments as soon as you're rested." Myra, who had carried the weight of their sickness for so long, just nodded, unable to find words. She was led away with a group of the most frail toward a bright, open infirmary that looked out onto a small, interior garden. Jin stayed near the chrysalis, feeling unmoored. The great task of survival was over. What was he now, if not the one who just kept the ship flying? Tay seemed to understand. He came over, handing Jin a simple, warm jacket. "It gets cooler in the evening cycle," he said. "Come on. There's something you should see." He led Jin down a long transit tube and into a large elevator. They rose several levels. The doors opened onto an observation deck. Jin's breath caught. The entire far wall was a single, curved pane of transparent alloy. Beyond it lay the Martian landscape, the rust-colored plains of Hellas Planitia, stretching to a horizon that seemed closer than Earth's. The sky was a pale, pinkish orange. But it was not the dead, barren Mars of old stories. Greenhouses dotted the landscape like scattered jewels. The lights of other domes twinkled in the gathering dusk. And high above it all, hanging in the darkening sky like a blue and white marble, was Earth.Home.Jin, stood there for a long time, silent. He felt a pressure in his chest release, a tension he had been born with finally melting away. They were here. They were safe. The proof was right in front of him. Councilwoman Hannah's broadcast, Tay said quietly, standing beside him. It's being played everywhere. The Concord is protesting, calling us sentimental fools. But here, the people, they loved it. Donations for your care and resettlement are flooding in from every province on Earth and Mars. They're calling you the returned. We didn't do anything, Jin said, his voice rough. We just ran away. You chose to survive, Tay corrected him. You chose to hope. That's all Earth ever did, too. That's why they see themselves in you. Weeks passed. The exiles, now called the returned by everyone, began the slow process of becoming people of a world, not just a ship. Myra spent her days in the labs with Min and the other geneticists. The treatment was not a magic cure. It was a series of precise, viral therapies that taught their cells to repair the old damage. It was slow, but for the first time, the decay was not just slowed, it was stopped. The tremors in Myra's hands vanished. Color returned to people's faces. Jin found his purpose again in the dome's engineering cores. His knowledge of keeping ancient, failing systems alive was unique and valued. He wasn't just fixing things. He was helping to build. One evening, Jin and Tay were back on the observation deck. Earth was a bright crescent. The Concord cruiser had left the system's edge days ago, its message of judgment unanswered and irrelevant. What happens now? Jin asked, looking at the stars, the same stars that exiled them. Now, Tay said, following his gaze, you live. You grow strong. You learn. This dome, this planet, it's just the beginning. He pointed to Earth. Someday, maybe you'll go there. Or maybe, he pointed out toward the stars again, a new, different light in his eyes. Maybe we'll go back out there, together, not as beggars or exiles, but as Terrans, with a new story to tell. Jin looked from the warm, welcoming blue of Earth to the determined, thriving red of Mars around him, and finally to the deep, endless stars. The stars were no longer cold. They were distant. They were a future possibility, not a judge. He was not an exile anymore. He was home. And home was not just a place. It was a promise that he belonged, that he was valued, and that his story, and the story of all the returned, was just beginning.